Hi guys, how you doing? Luna here with a new video for the channel. As you can see, I'm uploading videos frequently again. I hope you guys are enjoying all the content. Today, we have quite a special video because we're talking about one of the most iconic, legendary, and important albums in the history of music. Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys, released in 1966 by the mastermind, the wonderful and super talented genius, Brian Wilson. This is credited as a Beach Boys album, and you do have a lot of vocals from the rest of the band, but the thing is that Brian Wilson and many other bandmates from the Beach Boys, like Mike Love, have said multiple times that this was pretty much a Brian Wilson solo debut album, and it definitely does feel like it due to the lack of, surfing and beach themes that was seen in previous Beach Boys albums. The idea of this album came to fruition due to the fact that Brian Wilson stopped going to tour to kind of dedicate more time to the music, and that way he could create music that, wasn't necessarily meant to play live, which was one of the biggest barricades artists had at the moment. Make music that they could actually play live for the audience. Brian Wilson, once he was free out of this, of these shackles that had him in a prison where he couldn't experiment more with his music in fear that he wouldn't be able to play these songs or reproduce these songs live as the Beatles did in the previous year, he was relieved of all of this stress, of all of these feelings of imprisonment made by the thing that he loved the most, making music. So now he had all the freedom to do whatever the fuck he wanted to do in the recordings, and that came to be Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds is not only one of the most influential albums of all time, it is also one of the most popular and best sold albums ever made. And even though it wasn't like that, initially when it was released, with the years, Pet Sounds have grown a really strong and massive cult of people who absolutely praise the album and even consider the album to be one of the best of all time, if not the best. I decided to talk about Pet Sounds because around Christmas, a lot of the people take Pet Sounds out of the shelves because the bright, fun, colorful production that the album has often reminds you of a jingle, even though the themes have nothing to do with Christmas most of the time. They are, pretty lovely songs that you can definitely play and, mask as a Christmas song. And, I feel like a lot of the Christmas jingles post Pet Sounds took a lot of influence from the tunes and instrumentals that Brian Wilson developed in that album. But I'm not here to praise Pet Sounds even more. It is a wonderful album. It's one of my favorite albums. Not my favorite, I wouldn't put it in my top 20, but it's definitely an album that I enjoy a lot. So I'm here to kind of ask the question, is Pet Sounds really as great as everyone says it is? Personally, I just believe it was, but right now, it's really hard to see it. In order for you to understand my point of view, you sort of have to look at the history of Pet Sounds and how the album became what it is. The fact is that Brian Wilson wanted to experiment more with his music. He was already tired of these albums that were, had a lot of filler in them. He was amazed by Rubber Soul, an album by the Beatles, one of my personal favorite albums from the band, because he said that album had no filler songs and he wanted to do something similar. Funny enough, the Beatles were inspired by Pet Sounds to make Sgt. Peppers. Imagine the irony in that. So Brian Wilson undertook the task to create, craft, produce, and compose a bunch of tracks that were not filler at all. It was all meant to be in an album, and there wasn't a single on the album, there wasn't a track that was better than the other. Every single song on the album was supposed to be leveled on the same level of quality. He also wanted to change the way he approached songwriting, especially from the point of view of the hooks, the rhythm of the song, and the background music that was playing while he was performing or every other band member was performing the vocals. And that is the core thing about Pet Sounds. The chord progressions, the rhythm of the songs, the drumming, the production, everything about it at the time was really innovative, which caused everyone to jump in this train of praise for the album. Brian Wilson was heavily inspired on the Phil Spector's wall of sound technique of recording, where there's basically not a single quiet moment on the record. This was seen before. Again, Phil Spector was already doing that prior to Brian Wilson, but it wasn't done in the same way. For Brian Wilson made it in a way that it made much sense, and it's something that it's really hard to explain. It's way better when you actually listen to the album. The way that the album was recorded was also quite weird. There's a lot of statements statements from the band members and Brian Wilson himself, saying that he was nitpicking every single detail, every single note, every single fragment of the of the vocal, or every single fragment of the chord had to be perfectly aligned with everything else, which is the reason why the album sounds so perfect, at least from the point of view of a composition. Again, one of the main reasons why I'm doing this video is because for someone to listen to Pet Sounds now, it wouldn't be as impressive as it was for people back in 1966. For on the other hand, an album like Sgt. Pepper's, for example, that I wouldn't argue that Sgt. Pepper's is better than Pet Sounds, but from the point of view of someone who, you present this album to a person and say, this is the most important album ever, definitely someone can see where Sgt. Pepper's drew the line in terms of, influence and concept albums. But it's not as easy to look at all the amazing things that Pet Sounds influenced, when it was released. Plus the production, even though it was really polished, beautifully done, and just amazing at the time, when you listen to Pet Sounds now, it is a bit all over the place. Even with the remastered versions, I'm pretty sure that you can perfectly tell that the vocals and the, and the instrumentation kind of get mixed up in a certain point, and that wasn't the intention, because a lot of people argue that that was what Brian Wilson wanted to do, but no, it wasn't the case at all. And an album like Sgt. Pepper's, and again, I know I'm talking about the Beatles a lot, but it's kind of like the best reference. Not only Sgt. Pepper's, but Revolver, you have Rubber Soul, and even Help, Abbey Road, the White Album. I'm not gonna go as far as to say that the White Album had better production, but it does sound way cleaner and way better mixed than Pet Sounds. Even, I don't know how many years, 53 years after the release of Abbey Road, that album still sounds clean, and the production, every single sound, every single vocal, every single harmonies are so beautifully done that it sounds good even today, 50 plus years after it was released. And if you want to say, okay, that was 1969, Pet Sounds was released in 1966, the same thing happens with Revolver. Listen to a song like I'm Only Sleeping by John Lennon, that song uses a lot of harmonies and vocal modifications, and listen to a song from Pet Sounds. You'd see that the clarity of the vocals and the instruments are totally different. Revolver is far superior in that sense. So that is why I say that Pet Sounds isn't really as relevant, or it doesn't stand as tall today as it did back in 1966. A lot of people go as far as to say that God Only Knows, Wouldn't It Be Nice, Sloop Jumpy, Caroline are some of the best songs of all time. And while they are pretty good songs, they're amazing. I love every single track on this album. That is, an incredible exaggeration of the quality of the tracks in Pet Sounds. For again, the tracks in Pet Sounds, if you listen to them individually, you cannot really tell, or that, the greatness behind them is when you listen to the whole project. I believe that the influence of the record and the importance of the record really shines through. So I guess it's saying that, some of the songs here are the best of all time. It's exaggerating a lot, which only adds up to the fact that I believe the album isn't really as great today as it was back in 1966. Well, with albums like, let's not say the Beatles, let's say the Kings, for example. The Kings, Something Else by the Kings, sounds as good today as it did back in 1967, I believe it was. And remember, I'm only talking from the point of view of someone who has not heard the album and may jump into the album waiting to hear the most futuristic and timeless thing in the world. You're not really gonna find all that. You're gonna find a bunch of beautiful, incredible tunes. It's an amazing album. It's short, sweet. The themes that it touches are really beautiful. The way that it touches them are really beautiful. And pretty much is an album that you can both listen to and pay attention to the record, but also just play it in the background while you're in the car, making food or anything. It is a wonderful album, and I'm pretty sure that if I were to say which are one of my most played albums ever, Pet Sounds is going to be there, because I do listen to that album a lot. But because I listen to that album a lot, I'm able to tell its flaws. I'm able to tell where the album failed. And I believe that when there's so many people today, especially around this time of the year, saying that it's the best album of all time, or the most important album of all time, or the most timeless record of all time, you do have to sort of raise your hand and say, probably no, it isn't. It is a great album, but it isn't all that. The same thing happens with albums by Pink Floyd, like The Wall or Dark Side of the Moon. Pink Floyd have way better albums and most important and more influential than those two records that are the one that people usually refer to as your best. For example, Animals. The same thing I did with my Queen overrated video, where I talked about Queen perhaps being overrated, where I'm not saying that Queen is not one of the greatest bands of all time. They definitely are. They were really influential, really important for music. But when you compare it to other artists, even only in the 70s, like Bob Dylan, David Bowie, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, The Who, you're gonna find that they completely obliterate Queen in terms of discography. Especially if you look into the 80s, there are some really dark times for Queen. So that's the same argument I'm making here. I do love Pet Sounds. I do think it's an amazing album. Songs like I Just Wasn't Made for This Time, That's Not Me, You Still Believe in Me, Wouldn't It Be Nice, with those beautiful, I don't know, xylophones at the beginning of the track. I don't know how they're called, but it's a beautiful track. God Only Knows, Pet Sounds, Caroline, #1. I love it. I love the record, but is it the best album of all time? I don't think so. I don't think it's even in the top 10, top 20. Is it the most influential album ever? I would argue it isn't. I think that there are other pop albums, even only in the pop realm, I think there are albums that were more influential. Is it the best album in terms of production? I don't really think so either. Maybe at the time it was, but with the years and remastered versions and remixed version, I think there are albums that were obviously more polished and were recorded in a way better way than Pet Sounds. Is it the album that finally made the Beach Boys go over the Beatles in terms of quality? Well, considering that same year the Beatles released Revolver, again, I don't really think so. Revolver for me is a way superior album, and even Rubber Soul, it's a better album than Pet Sounds, in my opinion. So I do love the record. I do think it's an amazing album. I do encourage anyone who hasn't even heard the record to do it, because you're about to listen to one of the best albums ever. But I just don't think the album is as great or, the greatest of all time as a lot of people say. I do know the struggles and the creative process behind the record being an amazing story. I definitely encourage you to go and search for a documentary or a page that tells you the story of the recordings of Pet Sounds. How there are a lot of myths around it saying that the bandmates didn't like the album at first. Even though they constantly deny it, but it's a pretty believable rumor that because of the change of pace this album was for the Beach Boys, the rest of the bandmates, especially Michael Love, didn't like the record. How the Pet Sounds was only the beginning of what the Smile Sessions was going to be, which said by Brian Wilson himself was going to be his greatest album ever. And pretty much, man, I just think that the whole story behind Pet Sounds is really interesting and something that definitely, if you're a music fan, you have to listen to. So go ahead, look it up on the internet, or maybe I'll leave you a page down below. Go to Wikipedia or something. But yeah, Pet Sounds, I love the album. I think it's great. I fucking love the record, but I do believe that even in, especially in this time of the year, the album can be a bit overrated. That will be it for today's video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, go ahead and leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. Let me know if you want me to talk about any other legendary album or legendary artist or legendary, discography, and I'll make sure to fulfill your request and reply to your comments and give you a little shout out at the end of the next video. So let me know your opinion on Pet Sounds. Do you think the album is overrated? Do you think the album is overhated? I'm more than open to listen to all of your opinions, so go ahead, leave it down below so I can check it out and reply to your comment as well. And with that being said, guys, once again, I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you guys soon with a new video. But until then, bye.